on now to the presentation of the project that won the 2013 President's Bronze Medal for the best design work produced in the course of a Part 1, RIBA Part 1 qualification or equivalent. The project is called Helsinki Archipelago Town Hall, produced by Ness Lafoy from the Bartlett School of Architecture. Next.
The project I'm going to be presenting today is called the Helsinki Archipelago Town Hall. The building aims to provide a mainland hub for the increasingly isolated residents of the Helsinki Archipelago, which surrounds Helsinki in Finland. Its kind of aim is to promote the continued inhabitation of the island. The archipelago around Helsinki is dotted with small pine-covered islands. They're extremely unspoiled and beautiful, and many are inhabited by just one or two households. Altogether, there are 455 islands in the Finnish archipelago, and they're home to over 50,000 people. Upon visiting the city of Helsinki, it struck me how close the islands are to the mainland, and yet how inaccessible they are, despite constantly kind of being in the background of any sort of photograph you take or whenever you're walking around the city, really. The vast majority of islanders live without transport links to the mainland, and most of the islands lack telephone lines or internet connection, rendering the archipelago a kind of increasingly inconvenient place to live in the modern age. This has led to an influx of islanders moving back to the mainland, back to the cities. The main objectives of the town hall then are to provide a mainland hub for these islanders, to host local, national and European scale events and meetings. This is to host kind of meetings between island council members and to kind of try and promote a bit more connection between the islands and the mainland. It's also to promote the archipelago to tourists and to improve accessibility to the islands. The proposed site for the town hall is in the Helsinki Central Harbour, which is kind of in the mouth of, it's sort of in the middle of Helsinki right there. It's a tourist port, and ferry services run to nearby Tallinn. But you can't really get many ferry services to any of the islands, which you can see very clearly from the harbour. You just can't really get there. One of the main influences in the design of the town hall is the architectural typology of the houses that are found in the archipelago. Many of the dwellings are traditional Finnish farmhouses. These are typically timber-framed, pitched-roof dwellings, often clad in painted wooden shingles. I was kind of mainly interested in the internal layout of these buildings, which are generally centred around a huge double-height space in the middle, a kind of communal room from which all of the smaller rooms lead off of, generally dominated by a huge fireplace, a kind of cosy, warm, inviting space. And the design of the town hall kind of exaggerates this idea of a tupa, which is what the space is colloquially known as, and kind of abstracts the form to create the communal clubhouse used by the islanders. The main aim of the town hall is to bring the archipelago into the public conscience, to kind of make it more accessible and easy to inhabit, without detracting from any of its natural beauty or what makes it so unique in the first place. There are three main components to the town hall. The first is the sorting office, and kind of providing a postal boat delivery service to the islands in the archipelago. It would act as an extension to the existing postal service in Helsinki. There's already a similar service in operation in the nearby Turku archipelago, and it's been extremely successful, and as a result the Turku archipelago is much more inhabited than the Helsinki archipelago, despite having a similar number of islands and households. The second component to the island is the clubhouse and canteen. This provides a kind of warm lounge for islanders to relax in after a long, treacherous boat journey from the archipelago. This, in some ways, is the tupa lounge of the town hall. The third aspect is the accommodation units, which can be used as a base for islanders when visiting the mainland, so a place to moor up overnight and get a good night's sleep. The final aspect is the civic aspect, so the council chamber, which is for use by the island council for meetings, lectures, and other cultural events to kind of promote the arts of the archipelago. I approached the site by developing a fractured landscape in the harbour, which mimics the geography of the archipelago. This kind of gradual fracturing of the landscape extends the public promenade out kind of over the water into the harbour, reaching towards the archipelago and creating new public spaces within the city. I used the existing street layout which sort of directs a grid of fixed platforms around which components of the town hall are configured. This is the master plan of the town hall. The only part of the town hall which actually sits on the harbour's edge is the Islanders Clubhouse and Archipelago Postal Service. From there, the public platforms create a kind of canal system, which is a continuation of the street map out over the water, around which the accommodation units float. Out at the furthest point at the end, looking towards the archipelago, is the council chamber. Something which became quite an important idea throughout the project was kind of varying levels of stability, which an islander's lifestyle provides. So these kind of different feelings underfoot, kind of different levels of security and rigidity, which are subtly mimicked in the surfaces of the town hall. So, for example, the solid kind of safety of dry land is mimicked in the fixed public platforms. The unbalanced nature of a pontoon in the floating walkways leading to the accommodation units, and the units themselves kind of mimicking this buoyant yet stable nature of a moored boat, kind of safe environment. These changes in stability also help to kind of softly denote and kind of differentiate, I suppose, public and private zones within the town hall. This is a kind of some drawings of the accommodation units. The accommodation units are intended as small cabin-like spaces for islanders to spend the night in on the mainland. The units are designed with a tank system, which allows them to be partially submerged when not in use, and then activated when the islander docks a boat next to them, so the front tank's empty of water and the unit rights itself in the water, allowing it to be accessed by the user. And this kind of rising and sinking creates a constantly fluctuating landscape in the harbour. The rising up of an accommodation unit signifies the presence of an islander on the mainland, and this movement of the units kind of illustrating or communicating the comings and goings of the visitors and a building which is in constant flux. Once a unit is inhabited, outriggers are lowered to increase its stability. These outriggers also provide extra outdoor space, and when the units are inhabited, they can be accessed from the public platforms, creating a sort of temporary residential street and community in the harbour, but one whose inhabitants are constantly changing and kind of swapping around. So city dwellers walk past the front porches of islanders, and also islanders can walk into town. It's kind of an intermingling. Public platforms lead out to the council chamber, which is intended to host these meetings between the island council, and also to hold conferences, lectures and film screenings. Similar to the accommodation units, the council chamber tilts in the water. So when in its flat position, shutters are held open on the facade, flooding the space with light, rendering it kind of a good space for meetings. And when needed to be used as a lecture theatre or for film screenings, the front chamber floods with water, the council chamber tilts slightly, the ropes become slack and the shutters close, providing good space and nice dark raked seating for lectures and film screenings. And this is a plan of the clubhouse and sorting office, and the only part of the building which sits on the land. It is linked to the clubhouse is on this side and the sorting office is out at the end. And the reason for kind of linking the two together was because I spoke to a few people whilst I was in Helsinki, and people really form quite a close relationship with their postman, because if you're the only person living on an island, often the only person who you see who's different to your family every day is your postman delivering your newspaper every morning. So that was kind of why, so the idea of the canteen was it was a place for not only islanders to go and eat once they'd arrived and spend the weekend in the city, but also a place for the postman to eat. This is a long section through the clubhouse and sorting office, demonstrating the activity in the building kind of throughout the course of one day. So starting up at the left there, the post is brought in early in the morning, sorted into 3 postal rounds to be taken out to the archipelago. It's then loaded into the postal boats and taken out. And as the postmen return for lunch in the canteen, islanders are also arriving at the same time and can eat together. And then an evening is spent in the Tupa Lounge, which is the exaggerated height timber framed space on the first floor of the building. This is the Tupa Lounge. So the vast sort of glazed exterior walls of the Tupa Lounge provide views out to the archipelago and then back over the city of Helsinki, flooding the space with sunlight during the long summer days. The lounge is intended as a sort of peaceful space for reading, relaxing and socialising around the fire after a long boat journey or a busy day in the city. Throughout the project, I was quite conscious to develop the town hall on a sort of very human, kind of personal scale. So what it would actually be like to be the user of the town hall, what would it look and feel like to spend a day there. I did this by following kind of characters throughout the design process who would become the users of the town hall. So, for example, an islander or inhabitant of the archipelago, a mainland city dweller, a postal worker, and a tourist. So here again is kind of a day in the life, I suppose, of the town hall. So starting very early in the morning with the postal service, then an islander arriving whilst the boats have been taken out, and then eating in the canteen, maybe attending a meeting in the council chamber, and then spending the evening back at the Tufa Lounge. So at night, the clubhouse sits on the harbour's edge, welcoming any approaching boats. The Tufa Lounge fire lighting up the first floor, and smoke from the wood-burning fire acting as a beacon to approaching visitors. An islander arriving after a treacherous journey by boat navigates the canal system upon reaching the safety of the harbour to find an uninhabited accommodation unit to moor up to for the night. The water between the platforms and accommodation units kind of acting as waterways and guidance for the boats to pass through. They settle into their accommodation units and unload their boats before heading into the clubhouse to get warm. The islanders, after heading inside, the islanders can spend a cosy evening in the Tufa Lounge and meet with old friends and sit by the fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Ness. I must say, I thought it was beautiful drawings, and I really loved the exploration of the section particularly. But of course, beyond the drawings, I guess there's really quite a serious social and geopolitical agenda that you're following, you're exploring here. Joseph, do you have any comments for
I'm puzzled by some features of the project because the business of tilting seems to me rather expensive in relation to what is gained by it. I don't understand the gain that this expense produces.
Well, the kind of original intention was that the building would not be a kind of permanent feature in the harbour, which is originally why these units were floating. And then the tilting originally intended kind of the submersion is sort of so that the harbour can be kind of can regain its natural how it looked before. So it's kind of that was the original intention, was that it was kind of a quite a subtle sort of presence in the harbour, and then it kind of led on to become this kind of representation of islanders sort of showing their presence. So our town hall is really trying to be a kind of a proper sort of representation of islanders on the mainland, and kind of really sort of reminding the city in a way that it's there out in the harbour.
I think you're getting it at great expense. For you to estimate whether it's worth it or not, but I think I'm a little bit puzzled by that. The other thing that puzzles me is why you did it on the mainland rather than on one of the islands.
Yeah, the reason for that really is that by putting it out on an island, it's kind of spoiling the kind of natural unspoiled beauty of the archipelago, and by putting it on one individual island, it doesn't really achieve what I kind of wanted it to. So by putting it on the mainland, putting it in the tourist port, it's kind of promoting the archipelago as another place that one can go and visit whilst there. It really involves the residents of the archipelago in the city. And one of the other problems was that when residents of the archipelago come to the city, there's nowhere for them to sort of stay overnight and meet together. And so that's why it's on the mainland, really, because it's kind of a sort of kind of general meeting point, communal meeting point for all of the islands.
Well, I'm seduced by the drawings as well, but I'm a bit sceptical about the economy of it.
Well, I think we always have this tension, don't we, Joseph, of trying to instill into the students the importance of resource management, but at the same time, just really exploring experience. David, when on a day of judging, when you saw these, seductive drawings, quite remarkable, really. And do you have any other questions for us?
It's very well argued. It tells a story. It's obviously going to be useful. I guess the questions I had. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think that we had them all the day. Although I think it just charmed everybody, I have to say. And then over and above that, the obvious utility of it to enhance this idea of archipelago living. I think that's actually the key to it, and in a sense, it's the thing I've got a question about. That if you're going to look at the idea of something that is impermanent, the boat building, the benchmark really for me was set by Rossi with the Teatro del Mondo. I was completely sold on this great yellow and blue thing floating down the Grand Canal in Venice. And I still am, actually. Although the interesting thing is inside, like a lot of timber architecture, it's all bent over nails and it's pretty clunky, frankly. And I guess I've got a question which boils down to this thing about the civic, which is that if we're talking about the town hall, it has certain civic values which are about pride and association and defining a place, in this case the archipelago, as being somewhere that's worth keeping and worth valuing. I appreciate that timber's probably the natural thing. Once you set yourself, dare I say it, the limitation of referring to the tupa as the source, it tends to condition, dare I say it, a lack of grandeur. And so I guess the question, were you never tempted, if not to make it more grander, at least to make it more sensual? I think it's extremely sensible. And there's just a sort of element where, frankly, I want to actually, I'm not worried about money, it's appallingly irresponsible to say so, but in a sense I think it needs more extravagance, because I think it's about civic value.
Yeah. Well, I think it was kind of, I wanted it to sort of not be a kind of obnoxious, not so obnoxious, but kind of loud building in the harbour and kind of detract or sort of try and force people into this idea of visiting the archipelago or involving it in their pinches or anything. It's more kind of that I wanted to create a space that was kind of slightly reminiscent of what you might recognise as being something native to the archipelago, but placed into the sort of context of the harbour and not trying to kind of become something that overshadows too many, because the sort of backdrop of the harbour, these kind of beautiful buildings, it's sort of quite an iconic view really, and so I kind of thought that it would be perhaps slightly insensitive to design something that was kind of detracting from that, I suppose.
Alexandra?
Yes, I'm very happy with your answer, because I completely agree with that, and it leads me on to actually my question, which might sound superficial, but I hope it's actually understood as something more profound than that. Your means or media of representation, everybody praised you about your seductive drawings, but I am a little bit uneasy about, on one hand, what seems to me, from what I've seen, a very sensitive, very nuanced, very sophisticated, I think from a brackets critical regionalist kind of point of view, but so the sensitivity argument, I buy completely, something that feels that it could have always been here. The materiality of it, the timber, perhaps the kind of slightly more homemade feel as opposed to something that feels imposed, which the project talks about. Yet your media that you chose to represent have a very, very, very different kind of communicate something very differently. They have this kind of flattened pop aesthetic. Yeah. And they also, apart from some very final drawings which are still fully computerized without any reference to the one outside, but certainly everything before is completely decontextualized. This extraordinary landscape that you're building in, that you're drawing the sensitivity of the materials and the space and so on from, and the cultural mores and manners, is not there. And I'm sure that's deliberate, because there's a very clear kind of public education leaflet aesthetic to this. So I don't know. I mean, do you have something to say about this? Because it strikes me as well.
Yeah, well, I think I didn't kind of set out originally thinking I'm going to do all of these things in a kind of cartoony style or in a kind of flat style. It was something that kind of developed as I was designing the town hall, because I was quite daunted at first by the kind of tasks that I'd set myself with, these kind of different components that I was trying to bring together. So I think it kind of that's when I started to kind of introduce the idea of the characters, the different groups of people, and trying to sort of zoom in on a more personal level. And the way that I was kind of drawing, sketching out the building, kind of lent itself to this kind of sequence of events, a sequence sort of a single person using a certain part of the building, sort of zooming in really far and then zooming back out again to the master plan. And it kind of lent itself quite well to this sort of cartoon strip, I suppose. So it wasn't really intentional at the beginning, I think that's kind of why I did it. It was because I think I wanted to tell kind of a full story of the building. And so
Just as a, sorry, did it feel that it distanced you a little bit in the end? The narrative, the storytelling might have distanced you from the actual place, the landscape that is not conveyed as strongly as perhaps it could have.
yeah, perhaps. I mean, perhaps it would have been sort of beneficial also. I think maybe I focused too much perhaps on the island and the kind of the building that it's built for or something. But maybe it would have been more beneficial. Something I'd like to go back and do is to focus perhaps on the point of view of a resident of Helsinki and what kind of impact this building being built in the harbour would have on them, and that perhaps would be a way to get some external context back in.
Well, for me, I thought that the drawing somehow captured that spirit of the narrative. That was the thing that attracted me to the technique of the drawings. Are there any questions for Vanessa?
Two things. I admire your speaker picking up on the discussion about the way it's presented. I don't believe the sky in Helsinki is quite like that. And I think there could be a much more precise attention, not to, in a sense, making an image, but actually testing what the quality of that space is and the light and the materials. Actually, you can do it. You know, the techniques are available. So I think this is, if you like, a gloss on an idea. The other one is just thinking back to being in Helsinki in January and seeing the harbour frozen over. There are whole issues about climate that you could be responding to. And I think there is, for quite a long time, there's been an interest in making buildings move in order to respond.
Yeah.
I tend to believe that generally buildings don't have to move in order to respond. And the final comment is there are all those little civic spaces made by Alvar Aalto with incredible care for tiny rural communities, but he actually makes space between the buildings. And the buildings contribute to that space, which is a believable civic space. So there's a kind of tradition there. So these are all overlays on wonderful work, but maybe something to think about.
Would you like to comment on that? I mean, particularly on the climatic response.
Yeah, so the kind of it's a thing I kind of didn't really mention actually is the kind of a sort of larger scale thing with the town hall was that there would be a larger ferry service introduced, a kind of more regular ferry service to some of the smaller islands. Which there's currently an icebreaker ship that breaks up, supposed to break up all the ice in the harbour in the winter out as far as the sort of third island out of the harbour. So the kind of extension of these services was kind of an idea that on the building of the town hall, perhaps more routes would be cleared to these islands. Because I mean, most of these islands are really far out and it's inaccessible for sort of 3 months of the year. So kind of the idea of the town hall was that it could render these places perhaps more accessible in winter as well, which obviously is something that at the moment isn't entirely possible, but that perhaps building of something of a centre like this could perhaps accommodate.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.